Police are one step closer to answers for the family of a man who was shot and stabbed to death in Leichhardt 8 years ago. One of his alleged killers has been arrested by Thai police and hauled back to Sydney to face a charge of murder.
What happens when a rising star in the world of kickboxing ends up on death row in a foreign country? Sounds like something out of a movie, right? Well, this is the wild, real-life story of Antonio Bagnato, an Aussie fighter who went from throwing punches in the ring to being accused of murder. Twice. His life took a dark turn after a brutal killing in Sydney, followed by an even more shocking crime in Thailand involving a former Hells Angels member. Add a prison escape, torture claims, and a dramatic return to Australia, and you've got one of the craziest crime stories you've probably never heard of. Antonio Bagnato didn't grow up in the spotlight, but he found his way into it with fists, sweat, and raw talent. Born in Sydney, he carved out a name for himself in the brutal world of kickboxing. Strong, confident, and fast on his feet, he quickly made waves in the local fight scene. He wasn't just another gym rat. People saw him as a real contender, a future champion maybe. Outside the ring, though, Bagnato was mixing with some dodgy company. He trained at St. Michael's Fight Club, a place known not just for fitness but also for a few shady characters. Among them was his cousin, Diego Carbone, someone who'd end up playing a major role in everything that went wrong. Now, while Antonio was working on becoming a sports star, he was also building links to the criminal world. No one really knows where things crossed over, whether it was money trouble, bad influences, or just pure recklessness, but it didn't take long before things started to spiral. Then came the name that changed everything: Bradley Dillon. Bradley wasn't a gangster. He was just a 25-year-old cafe owner, a young dad trying to make ends meet. But apparently, he owed someone money. Not thousands, not millions, just a couple grand. $2,300 to be exact. You'd think something like that could be sorted with a few angry texts, maybe a threat. But this debt triggered something far worse. In August 2014, Dillon was lured to Leichhardt Marketplace in Sydney. He probably thought he was going to talk it out. But what happened next was brutal. CCTV footage later showed him trying to run for his life, bleeding, panicked, before he collapsed outside a supermarket. He'd been stabbed and shot multiple times. Paramedics couldn't save him. The attack was so sudden, so violent, that police knew it wasn't random. This was personal. Within days, eyes were on Bagnato and Carbone. Detectives tracked down witnesses, checked phone records, and pulled security footage. The evidence started stacking up, fast. But by the time charges were laid, Antonio was already gone. Just vanished. He didn't just go into hiding, he left the country entirely. No dramatic airport arrest, no police chase through the streets, just gone. And that raised a big question. Where does a young Aussie fighter with blood on his hands disappear to? While the investigation back home kept growing, Antonio was thousands of kilometers away. And he wasn't hiding in some quiet village or cheap hostel. He was in Thailand. What was he doing there? Laying low? Living it up? That part was still a mystery. But not for long, because the next time the world heard his name, it wasn't just about a cafe owner's death anymore. Something far darker was waiting. By the time Antonio Bagnato touched down in Thailand, he'd slipped out of the headlines in Australia, at least for a little while. But he didn't go underground in the usual way. He wasn't hiding out in a jungle hut or living under a fake name. In fact, he seemed pretty comfortable in Pattaya, a city known for wild nightlife, crime, and expats who don't want to be found. But if Bagnato thought he was out of reach, he was wrong, and fast. In late November 2015, another name hit the news: Wayne Schneider. A big, muscled-up guy with a long criminal record and ties to the Hells Angels. He'd moved to Thailand too, supposedly to escape attention, but also to stay connected to some serious underworld business. Then, one night, Schneider vanished. Neighbors reported a commotion outside his luxury villa. Loud noises, a group of men, and a white pickup speeding away. The next day, police found his house in a mess. His car was still parked outside, his door had been kicked in, and there was blood. Lots of it. For days, no one could find him. Then, in a quiet patch of jungle just outside Pattaya, a grim discovery. Schneider's body, half naked, beaten, and dumped in a shallow grave. The cause of death? Blunt force trauma. Basically, he'd been beaten to death. The Thai police moved quickly. CCTV showed a rental truck connected to the crime. And when they followed the trail, one name came up again and again: Antonio Bagnato. Turns out, Bagnato and Schneider weren't just random expats crossing paths. They knew each other. And from what police could piece together, they weren't exactly best mates by the time Schneider died. In fact, the theory was that they'd had a major falling out, possibly over drugs, money, or power. Police caught Bagnato trying to cross the border into Cambodia just days after the murder. He was arrested and thrown into a Thai prison, and from there, things got even worse. Bagnato claimed he was innocent, that he didn't kill Schneider, that it was all a setup. But Thai courts didn't buy it. He was charged with murder, deprivation of liberty, and concealing a body. The sentence? Death. That's when reality hit hard. An Aussie fighter, just a few years removed from gym sessions and tournaments, was now sitting in a Bangkok prison facing execution. It felt unreal. People back home were shocked, but also confused. Was this the same guy from Sydney who disappeared after Dylan's murder? Now, everything was tangled. 2 countries, 2 dead men, and one name in the middle of it all: Antonio Bagnato. And prison in Thailand? That wasn't like anything you've seen in films. What he went through next, well, let's just say no one came out of it untouched. Once the court handed down the death sentence, Bagnato's life changed overnight. Forget cage fights or rough gyms. This was a whole different level of brutal. He was thrown into Bangkok's Klong Prem Central Prison, a place known for overcrowding, violence, and zero mercy. From the outside, it looks like just another rundown concrete compound. But inside, it's chaos. Cells packed wall to wall with inmates, barely any space to lie down, no real beds, just cold floors, filth, and the constant stink of sweat and sewage. Bagnato wasn't treated like a regular prisoner either. Thai authorities saw him as dangerous. He was accused of killing a well-connected figure. So they kept him in maximum security, chained up, monitored, and isolated for months. He later said he was tortured, not just physically, but mentally too. Imagine being locked in a tiny cell for 23 hours a day, with no light, no privacy, and no way out. He claimed guards used beatings, sleep deprivation, and even psychological abuse to break him down. Food? Barely edible, mostly rice, sometimes rotten fish or dirty water. Disease spread easily. Medical care was almost non-existent unless you could bribe someone. And in places like that, money talks a lot louder than justice ever could. Even the other inmates were dangerous. Fights broke out constantly. Some didn't survive. Bagnato kept his head down, or tried to, but when your face is in the papers and your case is high profile, there's no real way to hide. Back in Australia, his story started popping up again. Media headlines called him everything from a killer kickboxer to a brutal enforcer. People wanted to know, was this just another criminal who got what he deserved? Or was there more to it? Meanwhile, behind bars, Bagnato's lawyers were fighting to appeal his sentence, and, surprisingly, they got somewhere. After a few years, Thailand's Court of Appeal downgraded his death sentence to life in prison. It was still grim, but it bought him time. That's when another twist came. Australia wanted him back. See, the murder of Bradley Dillon had never been forgotten. The evidence was still there, and now that Bagnato had already served years in a Thai prison, Australian authorities made a move. In 2022, they worked out an agreement with Thailand to extradite him back home. And just like that, after years in one of the world's toughest prisons, Bagnato was on a plane, handcuffed, guarded, heading back to Sydney. But the homecoming wasn't anything close to freedom. There were new charges waiting, a cold case had just been reopened, and this time there was no running. By the time Antonio Bagnato landed back in Australia in 2022, a lot had changed, except the fact that he was still at the center of a murder investigation. He stepped off the plane under heavy guard, straight into the hands of New South Wales police. No press conferences, no dramatic public statements, just quiet, tight security, and a one-way trip to jail. But make no mistake, this wasn't a fresh start. This was unfinished business. The murder of Bradley Dillon had never been forgotten. The case had stayed open, and now that Bagnato was back on Australian soil, there was no more dodging it. Detectives reopened everything. The CCTV footage, the witness statements, the phone records, all of it came flooding back. This time, though, they had a bonus detail. Bagnato's history. A death sentence in Thailand doesn't exactly help your defense. Prosecutors argued that Bagnato and his cousin, Diego Carbone, had lured Dillon to Leichhardt Marketplace under the pretense of settling a debt. But it wasn't a peaceful meetup. It was an ambush. And even though no one saw Bagnato pull the trigger, the case was built around joint responsibility. They were both in on it, both part of the setup. Carbone had already faced the music. In 2022, he'd been sentenced to a minimum of 18 years in prison for his part in Dillon's murder. That left Antonio next in line. Court documents showed that Bagnato still denied the full extent of his involvement. His defense leaned heavily on the argument that he'd already spent years in brutal Thai conditions and that he should be credited for the time he'd served. And that's where things got complicated. The judge acknowledged the hell Bagnato had lived through in Thailand. The torture claims, the overcrowding, the mental trauma. It couldn't be ignored. But at the same time, Bradley Dillon was still dead. A young father, shot and stabbed in a public place, and someone had to answer for that. In December 2024, the New South Wales Supreme Court handed down its verdict. Bagnato was sentenced to 17 years and 3 months in prison, with a non-parole period of 13 years. The time he'd spent in Thai prison was factored into the decision. But even with that, the judge made it clear. This was a serious, calculated crime, and justice had to be served. Outside court, Bradley Dillon's family didn't celebrate. There were no smiles, no sense of victory, just quiet relief that, after nearly a decade, someone was finally being held accountable. Bagnato, now in his mid-30s, returned to prison. Not in chains, not in a foreign cell, but still behind bars. He wasn't the young kickboxer anymore. No spotlight, no fans, just a long sentence, a ruined legacy, and a long time to think about how it all went so wrong. But even with the sentencing done, there's still one part of this story that doesn't sit easy. Because when you look at everything, the fights, the crimes, the prison time, you start to wonder, what actually made Antonio Bagnato the man he became? Antonio Bagnato's story is the kind that makes you stop and wonder. How does someone with talent, drive, and a future in sport end up tangled in 2 murder cases across 2 countries? He had everything going for him at the start. He wasn't born into crime. He wasn't dragged into a gang from a young age. He made a name for himself in kickboxing, earned respect in the ring, and could have built a life off that. But somewhere along the line, something shifted. Maybe it was ego. Maybe it was the people he surrounded himself with. Maybe it was just the lure of quick money and power. Whatever it was, it cost him everything. From Sydney's fight clubs to Thailand's darkest prisons, Bagnato's path was a steady slide from ambition to destruction. 2 men lost their lives: Bradley Dillon, a father and cafe owner, and Wayne Schneider, a former gang figure with his own demons. And through it all, Bagnato was either in the middle or just one step away. What's strange is how normal parts of his life once looked. Training sessions, fight nights, friends, fans, even a bit of local fame. He wasn't some faceless villain. He was someone people looked up to. For a while, at least. But choices have a way of stacking up. One bad move leads to another. One lie becomes a lifestyle. And before you know it, you're running from more than just the law. You're running from yourself. Now, Bagnato sits in a prison cell in New South Wales, counting down the years. No cameras, no fans. Just time. And a lot of it. His story isn't just about violence, it's about lost potential. About how fast things can spiral when you're chasing the wrong things, with the wrong people, in the wrong places. It's easy to look at headlines and think, criminal, end of story. But underneath all the noise, there's always a person, one who made 100 small decisions that led to one massive fall. So yeah, it might have started in a boxing ring, with gloves and lights and big dreams. But it ended in handcuffs, in courtrooms, and in the kind of silence that only prison can bring. Antonio Bagnato will likely walk free one day, but the damage is done. Lives were lost, families torn apart, and whatever future he once had, it's gone. All that's left now is the past, and the question that still lingers, was it all worth it?